Her image was cast in bronze, but the truth was hidden in the secret archives of the NKVD. Who really betrayed Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya? Why did Stalin give the order to burn Russian villages? And why was the heroine suspected of having a mental illness? For the first time, a full investigation based on declassified documents. You will learn the shocking details of Order Number 428, the broken comrade who turned Zoya in, and the peasants who hated her for their burned homes. A story where heroism is intertwined with brutality, and the truth turned out to be more terrible than the myths. November 29, 1941. The snow-covered village of Petryshevo, lost in the forests near Moscow, is living out its last days under German occupation. The frosty air is cut by the crunch of snow under hobnailed boots and the muffled chatter of soldiers. In the center of the village, on a hastily built scaffold, stands a young girl. She is barefoot, wearing only a simple shirt, her feet blackened by frostbite. Around her neck hangs a plywood board with a crudely written inscription in 2 languages: arsonist. This is not the execution of an enemy soldier. It is a public spectacle, an act of intimidation designed to crush any thought of resistance in the minds of the local villagers. The girl is made to stand on an overturned box. A noose is placed around her neck. She does not cry. She does not beg for mercy. Instead, she turns to the peasants who have been herded into the square and shouts words that will soon spread by word of mouth across the entire country. Citizens, don't just stand there. Don't just watch. You must help the Red Army fight. My death is my achievement. A German officer raises his hand to strike her, but she continues, now addressing the soldiers. There are 200 million of us. You can't hang us all. They will avenge me. The executioner kicks the box out from under her feet. Her body hangs in the air. Thus ended the short life of an 18-year-old girl, known at that moment only by the pseudonym Tanya. And so began her long, immortal life as a legend. 2 months later, after the village was liberated, a journalist for the newspaper Pravda, Pyotr Lidov, would write an article titled Tanya, and the country would learn for the first time of the unknown partisan's heroic deed. A few weeks after that, her real name would be established: Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, a Moscow schoolgirl, a Komsomol member, a volunteer. A photograph of her, taken by a correspondent at the execution site, her tortured body hanging from the gallows, would appear in every newspaper and become one of the most horrifying and powerful symbols of the war. This image would be pasted into Komsomol membership cards. Soldiers going into battle would carry it in their pockets. The image of Zoya, a holy martyr who accepted death for her motherland, would be transformed into an icon, an unbreakable weapon of Soviet propaganda. But behind the glossy facade of the canonical heroic feat, there is always another, more complex and ambiguous reality. Who was this girl really? What brought her to the snowy forests near Moscow? Was her mission a heroic act, or a brutal necessity of war that condemned both friend and foe to suffering? And the most important, most agonizing question: how did she fall into German hands? Was it a fatal accident, or was she betrayed by her own comrades, or by local villagers enraged that she was leaving them homeless in the middle of winter? Our investigation is an attempt to follow the bloody trail of that November night, an attempt to separate myth from reality, propaganda from facts, and to understand who Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya was, a flawless saint, or a living, suffering human being whose tragedy was far more complex than we have been led to believe. The image frozen in old photographs of an unyielding heroine, an icon of resistance, hides behind it the living, complex, and tragic fate of an ordinary Moscow schoolgirl. To understand what drove an 18-year-old girl to step into the icy hell of war, we must return to her short but eventful childhood. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya was born on September 13, 1923, in the Tambov region, in a village with the melodic name Osino Gai. Her parents were village teachers, but her grandfather was a priest who, according to family legend, was tortured to death by the Bolsheviks during the Civil War. This heritage, this priest's blood, became a stigma for the family, forcing them to flee from denunciations first to Siberia, and then, thanks to the help of a relative working in the People's Commissariat for Education, to move to Moscow. In Moscow, Zoya grew up as a reserved, serious, and very determined girl. She was an excellent student, especially fascinated by history and literature. Her notebooks were filled with excerpts from the works of Tolstoy, Mayakovsky, and Chernyshevsky. She devoured stories about the heroes of the Civil War and dreamed of heroic deeds, but her main passion was literature. Zoya kept a diary where she recorded her thoughts, analyzed the books she read, and dreamed of entering the Literary Institute after school. She wanted to be a teacher, not a warrior, to bring the light of knowledge to people. Her character combined an almost painful honesty, a heightened sense of justice, and an incredible vulnerability. This vulnerability became the cause of her first serious life crisis. In 1938, when she was elected Komsomol organizer of her class, she couldn't handle the burden. Her straightforwardness, uncompromising nature, and unwillingness to tolerate hypocrisy led to a conflict with her classmates. They did not re-elect her. For Zoya, with her maximalism, this was a terrible blow. She withdrew into herself and became distant from her peers. As a result of this stress, she developed a nervous disorder. According to her mother's memoirs, she suffered from apathy, became unsociable, and would be silent for long periods. In early 1940, she suffered from acute meningitis and spent many months recovering in a sanatorium for nervous patients in Sokolniki, where she befriended the writer Arkady Gaidar. This illness, which was carefully concealed during the Soviet era and, conversely, highlighted in the 1990s in an attempt to dispute her heroic feat, is an important key to understanding her personality. Zoya was not an iron soldier, but a person with a delicate, almost raw nervous system. She felt everything too acutely, took everything too much to heart. And when the war began on June 22, 1941, it was not just a political event for her, but a deeply personal tragedy. She could not stand aside. During the most terrible days for Moscow, in October 1941, when the enemy was at the gates of the capital, Zoya, like thousands of her peers, went to the district Komsomol committee. She didn't just want to go to the front. She wanted to be sent to the most dangerous sector, to a sabotage school that trained fighters for deployment behind enemy lines. They were honestly warned, few would survive, most would die on their first mission. But this did not frighten Zoya. Perhaps for her, with her heightened desire for heroic deeds and readiness for self-sacrifice, this was the only way to prove she was right, to prove her loyalty to the ideals she so sacredly believed in. On October 31st, 18-year-old Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, a recent schoolgirl who had dreamed of the Literary Institute, became a fighter in Partisan Unit 9903. Her short path to immortality had begun. To understand why a young girl who dreamed of books went out into the icy night with Molotov cocktails, one must hear the cold, ruthless breath of that terrible autumn of 1941. The Blitzkrieg, which was supposed to end in a couple of months, had stalled at the walls of Moscow. The Wehrmacht, exhausted by battles and stretched supply lines, got bogged down in the autumn mud and was now preparing to winter in the villages near Moscow, counting on the Russian winter as an ally. In this desperate situation, with the fate of the capital and the entire country at stake, the Supreme High Command headquarters resorted to an extreme, brutal, and, as time would show, highly controversial measure. This measure was formulated in a secret document that determined the fate of Zoya and thousands of others. Order number 0428. On November 17, 1941, Stalin and the Chief of the General Staff, Shaposhnikov, signed this terrifying order. Its essence was simple and horrific: a scorched earth policy. The order commanded to destroy and burn to the ground all settlements in the rear of the German troops to a depth of 40 to 60 kilometers from the front line and 20-30 kilometers to the right and left of the roads. The logic was militarily straightforward: to deprive the German army of the opportunity to be quartered in villages and towns, to drive the German invaders from all settlements out into the cold fields, to smoke them out of all premises and warm shelters, and to make them freeze in the open. The Russian winter, General Frost, was coming, and the Soviet command decided to make it their main ally by leaving the enemy without a roof over their heads. This order was to be carried out by specially created hunter teams of 20-30 people in each regiment, as well as by sabotage groups like the one Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya was in. They were given bottles with incendiary mixture, Molotov cocktails, grenades, and explosives. Everything was to be used: aviation, artillery, mortars. This was total war, where one's own territory and one's own villages were considered a battlefield that could not be left intact for the enemy. But behind this harsh military logic lay a monstrous humanitarian catastrophe. The order, in essence, condemned to death or terrible suffering the Soviet citizens who had not managed or been able to evacuate and remained in the occupied territory. These were mostly women, the elderly, and children. By burning their houses, stables, and food supplies, the saboteurs left them to freeze and starve to death in 30-degree frosts. The Germans, of course, also suffered from the lack of warm quarters, but they could always kick the owners out of a surviving hut, occupy the best premises, and take the last of the food. The first and main victims of the order were their own people. This tactic was not Stalin's invention. The scorched earth policy was used by the Scythians against the Persian king Darius and was also applied in European wars. But in the 20th century, after the adoption of various conventions on the rules of warfare, it was increasingly seen as a crime. It is not surprising that Order number 0428 was secret. It was never published in the open press, and for many years the very fact of its existence was denied. It was too inconvenient, too cruel, too much at odds with the image of the Red Army as a liberator. Many military experts, including the legendary Soviet saboteur Ilya Starinov, considered this order not only immoral, but also militarily senseless. It provoked hatred toward partisans and saboteurs from the local population, who saw them not as defenders, but as arsonists, bringing grief and death. People who had lost their last possessions and homes sometimes turned the saboteurs over to the Germans themselves, not out of love for the occupiers, but out of a sense of revenge and desperation. It was into this meat grinder, this conflict between duty and humanity, that 18-year-old Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya was thrown. She went to carry out the order, sacredly believing that she was helping her motherland. But for the people whose homes she set on fire, she was a harbinger of misfortune who had come to their village on an icy November night. This tragic contradiction became the setup for the drama that unfolded in the village of Petrishchevo. In late November of 41, when the forests near Moscow were already frozen solid, two sabotage groups from Unit 9903, under the command of Pavel Provorov and Boris Krynov, received a combat mission. Their ranks included former students, workers, and school children, among them 18-year-olds Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya and Vera Voloshina. The task was formulated in the spirit of Order number 428. Within a week, to burn 10 settlements, one of which was the village of Petrishchevo. The saboteurs were armed with rifles, revolvers, grenades, and most importantly, bottles of incendiary mixture, the infamous Molotov cocktails. The path to the target proved to be deadly. While still approaching the operational area near the village of Golovkovo, the combined detachment came under heavy German fire. The group suffered heavy losses and was scattered. Some of the saboteurs were killed, including the beautiful Vera Voloshina, who was captured after being wounded and hanged after torture on the same day as Zoya, November 29th. The survivors, scattered and disoriented, formed a small group under the command of Boris Krynov. Zoya was among them. They had only 3 Molotov cocktails left, and they decided to go to Petryshevo, the closest objective on their list. The village of Petryshevo was an important German stronghold. The headquarters of the 332nd Regiment of the 197th Infantry Division and a communications center were located there. Soldiers and officers were quartered in the homes of local residents, and horses for the supply train were kept in stables and barns. For the saboteurs, it was an ideal target. On the night of November 27th, 3 of them, Krynov, Kosmodemyanskaya, and another fighter, Vasily Klubkov, infiltrated the village. They acted individually to increase their chances of success. They managed to set fire to 3 houses where, according to intelligence, Germans and signalmen were quartered. Later, during interrogations, Zoya would say that she personally managed to set fire to the house containing the communications center, as well as a stable, destroying 20 enemy horses in the process. Panic broke out in the village. The Germans opened fire indiscriminately, while the villagers whose homes were burning tried to save their belongings. In the confusion, all 3 saboteurs managed to escape the village and hide in the forest. They had agreed to meet at a designated spot, but they were not destined to reunite. Krynov waited a long time for his comrades, but neither Zoya nor Klubkov appeared. Believing they were dead or captured, he returned to his own lines. The events that followed became the subject of fierce debate and formed the basis of the main mystery of this story. Zoya, left alone in the forest, for some reason did not follow her commander's trail. Perhaps she missed him in the dark. Perhaps her heightened sense of duty and youthful maximalism did not allow her to retreat without completing the mission. In any case, she made a fateful decision: to return to Petryshevo and continue the arson. This second trip to the village was suicide. After the night's fires, the Germans were on high alert. They had posted reinforced patrols and, most importantly, had organized a kind of militia from the local residents who had suffered from the fire to guard the village. They promised a reward to whoever caught the arsonist. The air in Petryshevo was electrified with fear and hatred. Some feared the Germans, others the partisans, and still others hated both. It was into this trap, this hornet's nest, that 18-year-old Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya walked on the evening of November 28th. She was going to carry out an order, not knowing that they were already waiting for her. Her last mission was becoming her last night. The question of how Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya fell into German hands is the most painful and controversial knot in her entire story. For decades, it has been the subject of fierce debates, overgrown with myths, speculation, and outright fabrications. There are several versions, and each of them, like a shard of a distorted mirror, reflects only a part of the complex and tragic truth, forcing us to ask again and again, what is a heroic feat, and what is betrayal? Version 1. The betrayal of Vasily Klubkov. This is the official, canonical version, which for decades was the only one possible in Soviet historiography. According to the materials of criminal case number N1644, Zoya's comrade in the sabotage group, Vasily Klubkov, was captured by the Germans, showed cowardice, and at the very first interrogation betrayed both Zoya and the group's commander, Krynov. The protocols of his interrogations, which were declassified only in recent times, paint a terrifying picture. Klubkov recounts, As soon as I was handed over to the officer, I showed cowardice and revealed that there were 3 of us, naming Kranov and Kosmodemyanskaya. The officer gave some order in German. They quickly left the house, and a few minutes later, they brought in Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya. What follows is even more horrifying. Klubkov, by his own testimony, was present during Zoya's interrogation. When she refused to answer questions, he himself pointed her out to the officer. In her presence, I showed the officer that this was indeed Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, who had come to the village with me to carry out acts of sabotage. After that, as we know, the monstrous torture began. Klubkov himself, according to his story, agreed to cooperate with the Germans, was sent to a reconnaissance school, and was later dropped behind the front lines as a German agent. He was soon arrested by Soviet counterintelligence, convicted of treason, and shot in April 1942. This version seems logical and complete. Here is the traitor who got what he deserved. However, many modern historians question it. They point to numerous inconsistencies in Klubkov's case and suggest that his confessions may have been coerced. In 1942, when the myth of Zoya was already being created, counterintelligence needed a specific, ironclad traitor, and a fragile, broken 18-year-old boy was the ideal candidate for this role. It is possible that he incriminated himself under pressure, and his real guilt was not betrayal, but simply surrendering without a fight. Version 2. The Revenge of the Local Villagers. This version, long considered anti-Soviet, became widespread in the 1990s. It states that Zoya was caught and handed over to the Germans not by her comrades, but by local residents enraged by the arson. According to this version, when Zoya tried to set fire to the barn of the village elder, Semyon Sviridov, on the evening of November 28th, he noticed her and called the Germans who were quartered at his house. Sviridov allegedly personally participated in her capture. And there's more. According to the testimony of some eyewitnesses, 2 female villagers, Agrafena Smirnova and Fekla Solina, whose houses had burned down on the first night, also took part in the abuse of the already captive and beaten Zoya. They allegedly beat her, taking revenge for the loss of their homes and property in the middle of winter. This version turns the story into an even more terrible tragedy. It turns out that Zoya, who went to die for her people, was betrayed and tortured by those very people. After the war, Sviridov, Smirnova, and Solina were indeed arrested and convicted of collaborating with the enemy, but they were later rehabilitated. Their guilt in the betrayal was never definitively proven, but the shadow of suspicion remained. Version 3. A fatal accident. There is also a third, most mundane, but perhaps most plausible version. Zoya could have been caught without any betrayal at all. After the first night of arson, the Germans and local police were on high alert. They had set up reinforced patrols and ambushes. Zoya, returning to the village alone, in the dark, unfamiliar with the area, was doomed. She could have simply stumbled upon a patrol or been noticed by one of the locals, who then raised the alarm. Her capture could have been the result not of someone's ill will, but of a tragic accident, compounded by a lack of experience and a monstrous combination of circumstances. So who betrayed Tanya? Was it a broken comrade in arms? An embittered peasant left homeless? Or was she betrayed by the war itself, its brutal laws and blind chance? We will probably never know the whole truth. History, like life, is rarely black and white. It is possible that in that terrible November night, all of these factors played their fatal role. But whoever the traitor was, it does not in the least diminish the courage of an 18-year-old girl who, in the face of death, found the strength not to break and to hurl her last, immortal words at her executioners. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya's capture marked the beginning of her ascent to immortality and simultaneously her descent into a hell on earth. The 2 days she spent in enemy hands turned into a continuous series of humiliations and inhuman tortures designed to break her will, extract information, and turn her into a pathetic, submissive creature. But the opposite happened. The stronger and more sophisticated the torment, the stronger the spirit of this 18-year-old girl became. Her silence in the face of death proved to be more powerful than any scream, and her resilience more convincing than any words. The captured Zoya was taken to the house of Semyon Sviridov, the same village elder who, according to one version, had turned her over to the Germans. From there, she was moved to the home of the Kulik family, where the German regimental headquarters was located. It was here that the first interrogation began. 3 officers and a translator tried to find out who she was, where she came from, how many people were in her group, and where they were hiding. Zoya remained silent. In response to all questions, she only repeated that her name was Tanya and that she knew nothing. This silence enraged the Germans. They stripped her naked and began to beat her with rubber truncheons. The owner of the house, Praskovia Kulik, later recalled counting about 200 blows, but Zoya did not utter a sound, nor did she beg for mercy. "Kill me, I won't tell you anything," was all they could get from her. After this interrogation, beaten half to death, she was taken to the house of another villager, Vasilisa Kulik, and here, the second circle of her hell began: torture by cold. The German guard assigned to her was ordered to march her barefoot, in her underwear, in the freezing cold. Every half hour, he would force her outside and chase her through the snow until he himself began to freeze. This went on for several hours, from 10 at night until 2 in the morning. Her feet, frostbitten and blue-black, no longer felt any pain. This guard, according to eyewitnesses, took sadistic pleasure in his actions. He was not just a soldier following an order, he was an executioner. But even in this hell, there were moments of humanity. The soldier who replaced the first guard turned out to be a decent man. He allowed the exhausted girl to lie down on a bench and even, at her request, untied her hands. She fell asleep. This short sleep, a few hours of oblivion before the final, most terrible morning, was her last respite. On the morning of November 29th, the interrogations resumed. They beat her again, demanding she betray her comrades, but she remained silent. All the homeowner managed to learn was that the girl was from Moscow. To all other questions, she either did not answer or answered with defiance. Her spirit was not broken. The Germans, realizing they would get nothing from her, sentenced her to death. It was during these terrible hours, according to some residents, that the very scenes occurred that would later form the basis of the accusations against Smirnova and Solina. Seeing the captured arsonist, the women whose homes had burned down, allegedly, began to curse and even beat her. "I swung my mitten at Kosmodemyanskaya twice, and Solina hit her on the legs with a stick," Smirnova would later testify during interrogation. Whether this was an expression of animalistic hatred and revenge, or whether they did it under pressure from the Germans to show their loyalty, we will never know. But this episode adds another tragic stroke to the picture of her final hours. She was alone, against her enemies, surrounded by people who saw her not as a heroine, but as the cause of their troubles. But even in this absolute loneliness, she found the strength to remain a human being and a warrior. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya's death could have remained just one of the millions of nameless tragedies of that terrible war, a line in a report on irreversible losses. But chance, or rather, the professional instinct of one journalist, turned her death into a deafening alarm bell that awakened and roused the entire country to fight. The birth of the Zoya legend is a classic example of how war propaganda works, how a single real heroic act, stripped of all inconvenient details, is used to create a powerful ideological weapon. It all began in January 1942. A war correspondent for the newspaper Pravda, Pyotr Lidov, happened to overhear an elderly peasant telling a story about the execution of a young female partisan in the village of Petrishchevo, near Moscow. The story caught his attention. He immediately went to the newly liberated village. There, by interviewing residents, he pieced together the picture of the unknown heroine's final hours. Her resilience during interrogations, the brutal torture, her courageous behavior on the scaffold. He learned that she had called herself Tanya and wrote down her last words, addressed to the people and her executioners. Upon returning to his editor, Lidov wrote an article titled Tanya. The article was published in Pravda on January 27th and had the effect of a bombshell. The country, exhausted by retreats and defeats, desperately needed a hero, a symbol of unyielding spirit and impending victory. And the story of Tanya was a perfect fit for this role. The article instantly became famous. It was reprinted in all newspapers and read on the radio. Stalin, after reading the article, is said to have remarked, "This is how our people should fight," and ordered that the heroine's identity be established at all costs. A special commission was sent to Petrishchevo. Based on photographs and eyewitness accounts, the girl's identity was confirmed. She was Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya. On February 16, 1942, she was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. She became the first woman to receive this highest honor during the Great Patriotic War. From that moment on, the propaganda machine went into full gear. The image of Zoya began to live its own life, separate from the real person. She was transformed into an ideal heroine, a Komsomol member, a beauty, a volunteer who endured torture but did not betray her motherland. She was compared to Joan of Arc, and her feat was equated with those of holy martyrs. Propaganda carefully filtered out everything that did not fit this flawless image. The fact of her nervous illness was concealed. Order number 428 and the fact that she was setting fire to the homes of her own fellow citizens were completely ignored. In the official version, she destroyed only German headquarters and stables. The version of betrayal by local residents was declared slander, and the traitor Klubkov, whose case was also classified, was named the sole person responsible for her death. A sterile, sanitized myth was created about a struggle between absolute good and absolute evil, where there was no room for shades of gray or complex questions. This myth proved to be incredibly effective. Streets, schools, and pioneer detachments were named after Zoya. Books and poems were written about her, the most famous being Zoya, by Margarita Alliger, and films were made, the first one as early as 1944. Her tortured body on the gallows became a symbol of the suffering of the entire nation, and, at the same time, a call for vengeance. For Zoya! With this cry, soldiers went into attack. Prisoners from the 332nd Regiment, which was stationed in Petrishchevo and responsible for her execution, were not to be taken alive. The legend of Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya became an integral part of the national consciousness, the foundation upon which the memory of the great victory was built. But like any foundation, it had its cracks and dark corners, which would only become visible decades later. Decades have passed. The war ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and generations have changed. But the name Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya still provokes fierce arguments, as if more than 80 years have not gone by. Her figure, cast in bronze by Soviet propaganda, found itself at the very epicenter of a war of memory that has not subsided to this day. For some, she is a saint, a symbol of unyielding spirit and sacrificial heroism. For others, she is a fanatic, a victim of an inhuman order, or even a mentally ill girl whose image was cynically used by a totalitarian regime. Where does the truth lie? In the 1990s, Amidst a wave of exposés of Soviet myths, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction. Newspaper pages were filled with articles arguing that Zoya was not a heroine, but a pyromaniac who suffered from schizophrenia. That her heroic feat was a fabrication, and that in reality, she surrendered without a fight. Everything was brought up: her nervous illness, the brutality of Order Number 428, and the possible betrayal by embittered peasants. They tried to turn her from an icon into a caricature, from a symbol of courage into a symbol of madness. This process of de-heroization was just as one-sided and unfair as the idealization that preceded it. The truth, as usual, turned out to be more complex and tragic. Today, now that the passions of the 90s have subsided, we can try to look at Zoya's story more soberly. Yes, she was not a flawless statue from a poster. She was a living person with a complex character, emotional trauma, and a heightened sense of justice. Yes, the order she was carrying out was cruel and condemned not only enemies, but also her own people to suffering. But does that negate her personal courage? Does it diminish the fact that an 18-year-old girl, after enduring hellish torture, did not break, did not betray her comrades, and met her death with her head held high? The story of Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya is not just a story about war. It is a story about human choice in inhuman circumstances. Her heroic feat is not that she burned a few houses. Her feat is that in a situation where anyone else in her place would have broken, begged for mercy, or betrayed, she found the strength to remain true to her duty and her beliefs. She made her choice, and she paid the ultimate price for it. The memory of Zoya is a litmus test that shows the state of our society. The attempts to either blindly worship her icon or to gleefully trample her name are two sides of the same coin, an unwillingness to see the complexity and tragedy of history. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya needs neither glorification nor vilification. She needs an honest, compassionate, and respectful perspective. A perspective that can see beyond the bronze monument and the newspaper caricature to the living, frightened but unyielding girl who stepped from her school desk straight into immortality. Thanks for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. There are more amazing stories to come. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.